Hey Village, so glad to be back with you again for our weekly installment of the Village Midweek podcast. This week we have Jim Smith joining us. Jim, could you give us a bit of an introduction to who you are and what your role here is here at Village?
Happy to. First of all, Pastor, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
And these are there's such innovation. I just love what you bring to our staff and just this whole idea of doing a midweek podcast, being able to delve deeper into the sermon. That is fabulous. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I've been just a short time just this year on staff. And so my role, I'm working with Dan Crawford. So I'm an assistant director for DNA groups. That's here. Fantastic. And so we're looking at building that up. We've already had just a history of great small groups here at Village. And as great as they have been, Dan and I had talked to Pastor Paul. He talked to us about kind of a vision for making it even better. And so that's kind of our goal, is doing some things to support DNA group leaders and the DNA groups. And really the vision is that we've always had small groups, for so long here at Village, but we become known as a church of DNA groups, not just with them, but of those. And that really is kind of fundamental to who we are, and that's kind of long-term what we're looking at.
No, that's fantastic. And so we're looking at launching our DNA groups this September, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we're gonna, for the first time, we're gonna have a chance to have a retreat with our DNA group leaders, and that's gonna be towards the end of August. Okay. And so we're gonna get together and hopefully be across ethnic fellowships and also include our great student ministry and getting them, so we're all on the same page and we're all kind of catching the same vision and we're connected together, supporting each other and moving that forward.
That's fantastic. And something that I've been discovering as we've been getting to know each other, Jim, is you are a man of many interesting facts, and unless somebody asks you, you're not quick to divulge what an interesting fact is. And so could you give us a quick, if you had to describe an interesting fact about yourself, what would it be?
Interesting fact about myself. I'm not sure there's that much interesting
about me.
No,
there is. He's also very humble and very good at downplaying himself.
So I think most of you know that I'm a dentist by training. I'd done that for 40 years, and I was in the Navy for about 24 years.
No, that's fantastic.
And so I'm from Portland originally. I'm a PK, a preacher's kid, and kind of I like to say that I joke sometimes that growing up I had a drug problem. I was drugged to a Sunday service, Sunday evening service, Wednesday midweek service, and usually there's a couple more services in there. So that was just kind of foundational to who I am.
That's fantastic. Recently retired, correct?
Recently retired in December of last year.
Okay, and then if you don't mind sharing a bit further, then what led you to the role of assistant director for DNA groups or life groups? Yeah,
that's a great question. Yeah, I had one thing I was interested in doing was going to seminary, and so I was taking some classes while I was still working at Western, and then I kind of thought, well, Lord, I'm getting to a point, I'm thinking about retiring, maybe I can move that up and I can support some things that are going here at Village, and had talked to Pastor Paul about that and said, Pastor Paul, I'm thinking retiring and I'll have some time available. How can I serve at the church?
Wow.
And so he thought about it. He says, you need adult supervision, so you stay under Dan Crawford.
No.
And so I said, you got it. So Dan and I, and Dan's retiring next month, so he's in the transition, and so he asked about us working with small group ministries, and that's really been a blessing to be on the staff, and we just have such an amazing staff that just do so much, and sometimes I think that you all punch above your body weight. You guys just do such a great job. I mean, it's just tremendous, and so it's really a privilege to be serving here at Village on staff.
Thank you so much. And so I think with your experience at Western Seminary as a student, now currently in your role as assistant director for our DNA groups, and then also being a former elder, correct?
Yes.
This is perfect to have you on this week's episode, because for Pastor Paul's sermon this past Sunday, Pastor Paul really laid out for us a charter for the direction of Village. Not necessarily a new direction of Village by no means, but really a clarification for what God has been doing and continues to do in the life of our church. And so Pastor Paul laid out very succinctly for us three different models of what a multicultural, multi-ethnic church could look like. And so he laid out one, an assimilationist model, where there is, to put it very simply, a majority culture that other minority cultures have to assimilate into. There is a pluralist model where we have multiple cultures, but they don't ever really touch or integrate or interact. But what Pastor Paul said, for us at Village, really what we're aiming for is an integrationist model where we're all interconnected. He called it a purposeful kingdom diversity. So then he laid out for us 4 Ds that really define the times we find ourselves in. And I'd love for us to interact and play with these 4 Ds if we could. One is decisionism. Some churches or communities place a strong emphasis on just one thing, whether it be evangelism or activism and the like. A decisionism. You have to make a decision. Other churches or communities talk about dogmatism. We're united by our doctrine or a defined belief. You have to believe this or else you're out. For other churches and communities, it's denominationalism, the affiliation to a particular community or tradition, denomination, and the like. But for us at Village, really the heart cry, the conviction is to be known as a church of discipleship, disciple making, of denying ourselves and following after Christ together. And so as you think of these 4 Ds that Pastor Paul laid out, how, of the initial 3, where would you say you tend to lean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Growing up in a Baptist church, I think it was more kind of that decisionism. There wasn't one thing. It was kind of basically that you didn't smoke, you didn't drink, you didn't play cards or dance, and those sort of things. And then those were kind of that's kind of decision dogmatism sort of thing. And so that was kind of my understanding of what it meant to be in church. And then as you kind of, we talk about, I think a couple of podcasts ago, we talked about conversion. And just as we kind of, God continues to kind of move us, the Holy Spirit moves us, matures us. We're moving more towards understanding what discipleship really is. And I know that's so near and dear to your heart, the whole issue of discipleship. Absolutely. And so that's kind of where I see that. And it's when we kind of talk about those models, it's being somewhat pluralistic. That's easier to do because I don't ruffle your feathers, you don't ruffle mine. We kind of meet somewhere a little bit. But when we get into that integrationist model, boy, that's when some turbulence comes when they intersect those Venn diagrams. And so that takes that maturity.
And I also grew up Baptist, and knowing the history of our church here at Village, we have Baptistic affiliations. But what I will say is when we have our all fellowship church gatherings, this is the most clapping and dancing I've seen at any Baptist church. And so we really are pushing the needle towards integration. Dr. Tupamahu, a couple of Sundays ago, preached on differences and how differences can be a site of struggle. But what I so resonated with what you just shared, Jim, is in an integration, it would be easy to do a pluralistic model where we just stay away from each other. That way our differences not only keep us apart, but our differences never have to interact.
Yeah.
But when we move towards an integrationist model, where we really sit across from each other and there's real skin in the game, our differences have to be recultivated.
Yeah.
Our differences can no longer be what keep us apart, but our differences actually have to be a gift for one another. And I think Pastor Paul talks about that so well, because he says, denying ourselves. That's what discipleship is. As you and I follow Jesus together, as we, Village, follow Jesus together, we have to not deny ourselves. And so that's the laying down of our preferences for the sake of discipleship. And so when you think about DNA groups, practically, what do you think our DNA groups have to offer us in discipleship as we move towards an integrationist model?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've done that so well, but we're looking though also that there is a desire, a need to grow in the one another's, and kind of the foundational verse for us is just, Jesus talks in John 13:35 about new commandment I have for you, the love one another. As I have loved you, so you're to love one another. And he goes on to say, they'll know you're my disciples, not by your doctrine, not by your dogma, not by outward appearances, the fact you don't drink, dance, or smoke, or those kind of things, but it's because you have this love for one another. And we've all seen that, certainly in our society now, we don't have much harmony, and so it's difficult. But when we love one another, we put that our differences aside, and we're united in Christ. I heard someone say one time, Pastor Tony, is that there's a price to be paid for intimacy, and that's conflict.
Wow.
Because you can have this false kind of, we'll all kind of get along, that kind of barely touching on the edges, but when we start to get to know each other, that's when we find out really who this real Jim Smith is. And boy, he doesn't pick up his socks and these kind of things. All those things come out, which is kind of uncomfortable. But that's what I think Christ has called us to do in discipleship. The disciples, his group, they're pretty diverse. I mean, you got fishermen, you got tax collectors, you got someone who's a politically a nationalist. And he's called them all together to, what are they doing? They're following him. They're following him. So that's why I see our small groups doing, is we're calling to come together. There's the hope, there's the faith, there's sharing life together. We learn to love God, we learn to love ourselves the way we should, learn to love others, and we learn to love the world as we do this together.
That is so good. That is so good. And so if I could just sum up for us then what I heard you say, for our DNA groups and for our discipleship pathway, our commitment here at Village is this. We want to make a decision to be dogmatic, to love one another, to have love be our common denominator. And so we want to reframe and retool the initial 3 Ds to really have that inform our discipleship and our disciple making, which takes place in community with one another, so that our differences don't keep us apart, but rather our differences be an opportunity to deny ourselves, so that we can love one another, so that we can learn to love God better, so that we can learn to love ourselves correctly. And so I'm so excited for our DNA groups, and really the goal is for our church not to have DNA groups be a offering, but really DNA groups to be central, pivotal to the life of our church.
And there's so much that I can learn. As I'm sharing my life, as we do this together in a DNA group, God teaches me through interacting with you. There are things that I'm going to learn that I didn't know through listening to your story, sharing that together, and getting insights from that. And that's so important. There's a whole nurturing that goes on. We're looking at DNA. The words that form that acronym are we're going to go discover, nurture, and act.
That's
and
fantastic.
so I'm going to discover things about you that are going to help me to grow. God uses that to assist me in that.
Yeah.
And so that's good for me to, sometimes I don't understand your story, but as I listen more, that is so insightful. And so it's just so helpful. So I'm just excited that we'll be able to do that in our groups.
Absolutely. Well, Village, this is our midweek podcast, and be on the lookout for ways you could be involved in the DNA groups this coming fall. Once again, we are so committed to pursuing this Christian life together, to discovering, to nurturing, and to acting together in the denying of ourselves and our preferences so that we can be a church of disciples. As always, if you have any questions you want to send in, do so at tony@villagebeaverton.com, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks so much.